Y'all, I am going to go ahead and dive in because this is in my sort of nerdy, analytical brain, former teacher, recovering academic brain. This is kind of my favorite session that we have, although it is chock full of content and sort of information, which might actually make it even more my favorite, because I like to make sure that we're using our time really wisely. So can everyone see my screen? Perfect.
Yes.
So this is our third session of the I Am an Advocate series, and it's the one where we finally get into sort of the real meat and potatoes of some legislative advocacy questions. So this is our agenda for today. We are going to have our advocate profile, which I'm super excited about. Again, this is going to be unique among our profiles and also really perfect for today's session. And then we're going to dive into sort of a primer on the Tennessee General Assembly, how it works, some of the nuances of it, the timeline of how things work, what your legislators' calendars probably look like, when it's the best time to talk to them and when it's not the best time to talk to them. And then we'll talk about our session that's coming up next, and we'll open the floor for questions and conversation. Again, I stop recording usually with about 15-ish minutes at the end so we can have candid conversation and questions. But if you have a question and you're scared you're going to forget it, go ahead and type it in the chat, and everyone will help me make sure that we get back to answering that as this session continues. So everything about the I Am an Advocate series has been about what it means to advocate and what it means to be an advocate, right? And so it's always about speaking in favor or in opposition to something on behalf of someone or a group of someone's. And today we're going to continue that conversation about what it means to be an advocate, what it means to advocate, how everyone can do it and find a path there. But we're going to take it one step further and we're going to take it to the actual concept of what it means to lobby. Because lobby often is sort of treated as a bad word. It isn't. As a registered lobbyist, I want to say that to lobby and to be one who lobbies is not bad. But lobby is just sort of takes advocacy to that status of you're speaking to public officials, policymakers, or legislators to take a desired action. To be a lobbyist means you're getting paid for it, but really all of us, when we're executing our calls to action, are in a sense lobbying. So we don't want to treat that as something that is like the other or what the other is doing. It is in fact something that most of us do on these calls, or most of us are on these calls to feel empowered to do. And we just really, I want us all to really embrace that idea of lobbying as something that is positive and it's done by all of us. So with that in mind, I've invited today's advocate for the advocate profile, and that's Kameron Dawson. She is, Kameron, correct me if I say this wrong. I should have written down notes, but I was like, oh, I know you, I can do this. Kameron is a staff attorney at the Southern Office of A Better Balance. And those of you who are have been connected with the Women's Fund for a while are familiar with the Better Balance because they led the statewide effort to pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that we worked in coalition with them on. And now we are working closely with the Better Balance about all paid leave issues, sick leave, family leave. But today I asked Kameron to be here as Kameron and to share a little bit of her story with us, because we've had 3 sessions and we haven't had an attorney, which is what most of us think of when we hear about an advocate. We think of an attorney or a social worker. And I thought it was really important to have someone with us who could bring in that element of familiarity to advocacy, but also speak to really the kind of work that we do. So Kameron, I am going to hand off to you to share your story. And I will be recording this, as you know, and sharing it to our website. And I'll share that link with everyone to share out as well. So Kameron, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Janine, for inviting me. And you said it perfectly, as it's just you're one of my favorite people to collaborate with in this space. And I learned so much from you just with Tennessee advocacy. And so I'm really honored to be invited today and just kind of share my personal story and take off, the attorney hat. I think looking back to my journey as an advocate, we don't often see how law and policy interact. I think in law school, you're focused on what is the law, how does it currently work, and there's not really a progressive focus on, well, how do we as lawyers influence what the law can be, and how do we change policy? So one thing I love about my work at A Better Balance is I'm able to help workers know their rights, and touch on what their rights are currently. And I can also help them enforce their rights and connect them with attorneys, or oftentimes we do enforce laws like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act or paid family leave laws that we pass. And then typically that is, the typical lawyer motions and actions, but I get to also work on the policy side and talk and connect with folks who are on the ground, who are organizing, and who are advocates where they see issues and problems and where the laws may not be effective, but they want to provide solutions, and I can give them that technical support or those talking points on how to get those laws passed. And A Better Balance is a nonprofit, so we are 501c3, but we are able to work with organizers and sort of support legislators in their efforts when they do want to take on policies like pregnancy accommodations or paid family and medical leave and paid sick time, which is so important to address infant and maternal health in this country, and especially in the South, where we do see many of those adverse health outcomes, affect low income workers and workers of color. So that's about what I do, but I do want to take a step back and kind of talk about how I got there. I'm originally from Lawrenceville, Georgia, and so I was raised by a single mom. And for many, in my family, many of the women in my family, we were told, just to make things work. You don't really cause waves. You don't, ask for accommodations at work. I was raised by my mother, but also my grandmother. And many times I had my own room in my house and never really questioned why that system worked, or why were things the way they were. And later on, just talking to my mom about, okay, what do you want to do when you grow up? And so the first answer was a teacher. And me talking with my mom, and of course sometimes it was, oh, they don't make enough money, so choose something else. um, and then I said, okay, I want to be a lawyer. And it really was my teachers and my community that really poured into me and allowed me to go through undergrad and go to law school. And I will say I did do Teach for America for 2 years, so I still was able to teach. And I taught fifth grade, and I really saw in the classroom that many teachers, were not able to take breaks. They were not able to really take the time off, or they were, but it wasn't encouraged. And so it really created this system, this environment where folks were just made to work and, not expected to take care of themselves or to really cause waves. And I thought, after personally experiencing some of those battles myself with my own health, that there's a way that the system can be changed. It doesn't, it shouldn't depend on, okay, I have a great principal at this school, I have a great team on my school chair. It should really be across the board, something that everyone can be able to access. And so, being able to share information with my community has been one of my main goals. I realize that the law can be this complex thing, but everyone can really understand it. And as much as we say that as a lawyer, we have this access to these tools and we have this expertise, if I can be able to break it down to community members, to people like my mom or like my friends, they can take that information and pass it on and become leaders in their community and be the experts in their communities. So being able to take that and pass it on has always been my main motivator in this work. And we sometimes say lawyers like to argue, and I've never been, that type of person. I've always been more collaborative. I just, I know when I'm right and I know what to say. And, sometimes I can be persuasive and argue when necessary. But policy and the law has really helped me organize and really hone in those tools. And it's been great to partner with folks and really just share expertise and share, my bit of knowledge, but work in collaboration with others who may have the expertise in the medical field or may have the expertise in maternal and child health, and really just come together and see how we can go forward in one goal. And so, just this past year, I've seen not just with the pandemic, but just with friends who have started their own motherhood journeys, the experiences that they have had, both good and bad. And that's really been a motivating factor for me to continue in this work, because, I do want to get to the point where having a child is not, a sentence for having adverse health outcomes, for being fired at your job, for being criticized for your decisions, but is actually a time of joy, and where, folks can thrive and not have to worry about, okay, I have to suffer in silence, or this is going to impact my family's ability to thrive economically where they live. And so I think being able to work on paid family and medical leave, or work on pregnancy accommodations, has really helped me share that wealth with my friends and family. And I think, sharing that experience and information with others across the country has really, been impactful and motivating. Um, and just kind of sharing that with workers on our helpline. So our part of my work too is being able to develop leadership and advocacy with other workers. So if they do find, if they live in a state like Louisiana or Texas, where laws may not cover their need that they have, they can advocate for that. They could share their experience, take what's happening to them and turn it into a powerful tool, and to really, make sure that it doesn't happen to other workers like them. And so it's really been beneficial to kind of give them the strategies. They already have the leadership, they already know their story, but here's how we can, share it with other legislators, with other groups. And they really do feel empowered, and they really do feel like they're being listened to, and that they got a chance to change things. So it's not just me, but it's also other workers. And I think that's really been impactful for me, and why, I chose a better balance as a career, and, being a staff attorney there. So I will agree with the definition you shared earlier, Janine, that, I do like to argue, I guess, in some ways, because I like to push for policies that impact women and families and birthing people. But I also have touched on some of that lobbyist, and, from going from a teacher to a lawyer to now policy work, it really has been a learning curve, but I think it's all been on that journey, and it really has followed, some of my values. So I think as you kind of find what policies you're interested in, or how to be involved, there are so many different ways to be involved, and it can be daunting at times, but it really just depends on, just find that connection. If you find a website, reach out or send an email or a phone call, because there are so many people who want you to be a part of this work. They don't want to do it alone. And, you really do have knowledge and expertise, or experiences and experiences that can lend to this work. So I don't know if I should say more, or Janine, did I fit the bill? If anyone has questions, I do plan to stay on as well. So happy to put those questions in the chat, or, share my contact information if anyone's interested in more of this work. But I definitely appreciate being able to share and join in with this great series.
Kameron, I love that, because I learned things about you, though we have been on calls together for a couple years now, pretty regularly. And thank you. And I just, I think you touched on a couple things that are so important. The first being that we all have our areas of expertise. I know when we were first getting on the call, we have a number of folks here who are also engaged with the League of Women Voters, who are my go-to experts on some of the political participation issues facing families, and facing voter equity and redistricting. We can talk about that on another call. And, you know, but it's so important that we all collaborate together and share that expertise. You and Feroza and Elizabeth and everyone at A Better Balance are my go-tos for paid leave. I don't answer questions when I get them without double checking with one or multiple folks there. And I think that's important, is your expertise comes in a large part from your village, and just learning the process. And I love that you talked about that, because I feel like this is a learning journey every year for me too.
No, for sure. And I think I've learned so much from you and Feroza, just seeing how the Tennessee legislature works, seeing where do we go, who do we talk to, how do these conversations usually run, and what are the main talking points has been, so impactful in my journey. Because I think as lawyers, we're really focused on what does the language look like, and we may not always be able to communicate the best or most persuasive way, but you and Feroz have definitely, helped me and helped others with seeing how do we hold our legislators and organizers accountable. So I appreciate it.
I swear I did not tee up that response, but it certainly opens the door perfectly to jump into talking a bit more specifically about the Tennessee General Assembly. I swear I didn't tee that up, Cameron.
We did not meet beforehand at all. This was perfect segue.
Like, teamwork is the dream work. So as promised, today we're also going to dive into the nitty gritty of the Tennessee General Assembly, because I think for any of us to be successful legislative advocates or lobby in any way, we really have to understand where it is we're going and how that place works, so that it isn't intimidating. So we take away that factor of, oh, the legislature, because it's not really, the legislature at all. They're just people in a building with complicated hallways. So in a nutshell, our Tennessee government is structured just like the federal government. We have an executive branch. In our executive branch, the governor is the leader, right, of our state. That's Bill Lee. He is up for re-election in 2022. We have a judicial branch that is led by the Attorney General. Our Attorney General in Tennessee is appointed by the justices on the Tennessee Supreme Court, and that appointment lasts for 8 years. So we will potentially have a new Attorney General in 2022 when those justices then appoint an Attorney General again. And then we have our legislative branch, which is just the fancy way of saying our legislature. Like the federal government, we have a bicameral General Assembly, meaning we have both a House and a Senate. Our lieutenant governor is Randy McNally. He leads the Senate. He's technically elected as the Speaker of the Senate, which makes him the lieutenant governor in the state of Tennessee. Senator McNally, our lieutenant governor, is up for re-election in 2022 also. And then our House is led by the Speaker of the House, and that is currently Kameron Sexton, who is also up for re-election in this coming year. So I'm giving you these dates about when we're going to have new appointments and when folks are up for re-election, just so that you know that this information is valid, but possibly only for a year or possibly for another 8 years. We don't really know yet. So that information, that's our government structure. It's very similar to the federal government, and that's who leads it, leads stuff here in Tennessee. So let's talk about the Tennessee General Assembly, right? This is the bread and butter of what we're doing. We'll start with the Senate. In our Senate, we have 33 senators who serve 4 years, or their terms are 4-year terms. We do not have term limits. The senators from even numbered districts are elected in the same general election every 4 years. That election just took place in 2020, and I listed District 10 just because that's one of our senators here in Chattanooga, Senator Gardenhire was just reelected in 2020, so he will not be up for reelection again until 2024. The senators in odd number districts are elected 2 years later, and then that continues. So that's 2022. Those senators are up for reelection, and that includes Senator Watson, Senator Bo Watson, who's District 11, also here in Hamilton County. Tennessee senators must be 30 years old, US citizens, Tennesseans for 3 years, and residents in the county that they, or in the district that they are running to represent for at least 1 year. As I said, the Senate elects their speaker, who is then our lieutenant governor. Currently in Tennessee, we have 27 Republican senators and 6 Democrat senators. We do not have any independents in our legislature. In our House of Representatives, there are 99 reps, and they serve 2-year terms. All members are up for re-election during the same election cycle. So they were all up for re-election in 2020. They are all up for re-election in 2022. So as you can imagine, that always leaves you with a little bit of uncertainty between legislative sessions because you have all of your House members up for re-election. Tennessee representatives must be 21 years old, US citizens, Tennesseans for 3 years, and residents in their county or district for 1 year. Currently, there are 73 Republican and 26 Democrats in our House of Representatives. So you can see that clearly there is a Republican supermajority in both chambers of our legislature, and then therefore in our entire legislature as it works out. So here are the fun things to know about just our legislature and the structure. We have had a Republican legislature and a Republican governor since 2010. It was the first since prior to 2010, it was, since 1869 was the last time that everything was Republican. We do have a Republican supermajority. The Senate and House districts are population-based, and so there's redistricting after each federal census or every 10 years. And so there are typically some court cases regarding that redistricting about every 10 years in the modern world. And we're waiting to see how some of that pans out currently. When our General Assembly passes a bill, it goes to the governor before it becomes law. In order for the bill to become law, he can either ignore it and not sign it, or he can sign it, right? So he actually does not need to take action for something to become law in the state of Tennessee. But he does have to take action to stop something from becoming law. And our governor does have to veto something. Vetoes can be overridden, but it takes a majority of both the House and the Senate. That very, very rarely happens. The legislature in Tennessee is a part-time legislature. They meet for only part of the year, from early January, so January 12th this year, to late April or sometime in May. It's increasingly been going later and later into May, but that's when our legislature meets. And legislators are present in Nashville basically Monday through Thursday. So this is really important if you want to if you ever are in a position where you would like to speak with your legislators. It's important to know when you might be able to find them or speak to them, right? So they typically have a Monday afternoon floor session. So many legislators from around the state travel to Nashville on Monday mornings. So trying to schedule a meeting with your legislator in Nashville on a Monday morning is a no-go for the most part, and that's important to know. There are committee meetings, like really heavy days of committee meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. There are floor sessions. And when I say floor sessions, that's when everyone is together in the actual chamber on the either Senate floor or the House floor. There are floor sessions on Thursdays, typically Thursday mornings. Depending on committee assignments and whether or not a legislator has a leadership position or a particular role to play, many legislators immediately following those floor sessions leave to go back to their home districts. So it is often very difficult to get in touch with a legislator on Thursday afternoon, or even to consider getting in touch with them on a Friday. So that weekly schedule kind of means that you have maybe Monday afternoon and Tuesday and Wednesday are your most likely times to actually reach a legislator, if in fact you are trying to speak to them personally or schedule a meeting with them personally. So the days that I go to Nashville are almost always Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And then I try to alternate because a lot of our legislators are really backed up in committees on one of those 2 days. And so every legislator has a different committee schedule, and you need to be aware of that when you're scheduling your meetings. So with just a little quick review of how our legislature works, what I think a lot of folks really want to know is, how does a bill become a law? Right? What is the process that a bill goes through as it moves through our legislature? There's a bill limit on each of our representatives. There are some exceptions to this, right? If you're in a leadership position or if you're a chair of a certain committee, you may be able to introduce more bills than this. But in general, each House rep, so each of the members of the House of Representatives, can introduce up to 15 bills per year. So that means we are looking at potentially 1,500-ish. It usually goes a little over because of those exceptions. 1,500-ish bills being introduced each year in our legislature. That means that you can have up to 3,000-ish bills in a session, because a session lasts 2 years. Every bill must have a House and a Senate sponsor. Senators do not have a limit on the number of bills that they can sponsor. So our representatives do, our senators do not. And that's simply because every bill introduced in the House has to be able to also have a Senate sponsor. And there are so many fewer senators than there are representatives. So the first step is having sponsors for a bill. And then in each chamber, the bill has to be introduced twice. So you'll hear terminology about a bill passing first introduction. Literally, it is read on the floor, it is introduced, and then it almost always passes first introduction. Everyone votes yes, this can keep moving. Then they go through that process again. It's read on the floor for second introduction, voted on, yes, it keeps moving. If it's stopped, it's almost always of the minority party's bill, and something that is super contentious, because even if most of the people on the floor know they would never vote for it, it almost always gets passed through first and second consideration, which is the 2 introductions. After a bill is introduced twice, it goes to the clerk and it is assigned to a committee in the Senate and a subcommittee, well, a committee and then the subcommittee in the House. Many bills move through more than one committee. So you can have something, for example, that is dealing with foster and adoption law, that is going to move both through children and families committee, as well as a legal committee, right? So as well as a criminal justice or civil justice committee, depending on the law. All bills also have to be assessed to see if they have what's called a fiscal impact. And when we talk about a fiscal impact, we're talking about a fiscal impact on public funds, whether they be state funds or city or county funds. And they are assessed both for the impact they would have on state funding and on local funding. Every bill has to go through that. Every bill then generates a document saying whether or not it has a fiscal note. We talk about things having a fiscal note, and that just means that they do in fact have a fiscal impact. If that bill or if that impact is determined to be significant, then that bill necessarily has to go through the budget committee and the finance committee. So it is not unusual. It is not a sign of trouble. It is not a sign of something going wrong with the bill if you see it move through multiple committees and then also have to go to a finance committee. It's just the process. It doesn't mean that there's a problem. In Tennessee, bills can move simultaneously in the Senate and the House, or you can have a bill that goes through the Senate first, or you can have a bill that goes through the House first, or you can have a bill, which is the case this session, that goes through the Senate in the first year of the session and is going to move through the House in the second year of the session, or vice versa. So if you've ever followed bills at a federal level, you know they have to move through the House before they can even be considered in the Senate. In Tennessee, that is not the case. You can also have things happening simultaneously, although that rarely happens because the sponsors work together more closely in a lot of cases. So it is important to note that there isn't a set pattern for how bills move in Tennessee. The Tennessee Constitution provides for 90 days of floor meetings for the House and for the Senate to be used per session. So they will meet on the floor in chamber voting sessions 90 times in a 2-year session to vote on bills. So that's how things get limited to some degree. The only constitutional obligation that our legislators have, right? So the only thing the Tennessee Constitution mandates that our legislature does is pass a budget. So if you've been following any kind of bills, or if you've ever tried to track legislation moving and suddenly the session ends and you were really interested in something and nothing happened with it, that's totally legal. If it stopped in the middle of the bills moving through committee and just ended, there's nothing unconstitutional about that being the process. So there is a sense of urgency and timing when you're working with sponsors or you're following a bill to make sure it gets through in time, particularly if it's introduced in the later part of the session. So all of this is, just sort of like a very, very, very condensed overview of how bills move. But let me bring it together for you because you're on this call to figure out how you can be heard, how you can chime in, how your voice can be heard to make an impact, positive or negative, like please support this or please oppose this about a bill. So let me sum this up for you. We've already shared that around 1,500 bills can be introduced a year, and your legislators are human and are not experts on all 1,500 of those bills. And you can imagine, if you will, put yourself in their shoes, right? You're like in school and suddenly you're accountable for knowing about all of these things on particular days. When you want to communicate with them about a bill, you need to be timely. Because if you call them and the bill is not on the calendar yet for their committee or their subcommittee or the floor, they unless they're the sponsor, they likely have not heard of this bill, they have not read this bill, they have not thought about this bill. And if you contact them in a time that isn't critical, this bill isn't on their radar, right? So if you're calling them 10 days in advance of when they might maybe hear about it, but they have 4 days of committee hearings between now and then and countless other bills, it's not a timely call, because they are going to either, they're not necessarily going to forget your call, but they're not going to have anything to contextualize it. So it's not going to register with them. So the time to contact your legislators, if you are asking for their vote about a bill, either for or against, is immediately before they hear it in one of the situations where they might hear it, whether that be a subcommittee, a committee, or a floor vote. And all of those calendars are posted on the Tennessee legislature's website, which is capitol.tn.gov. Also, I will drop in the chat in a little bit. We have on the Women's Fund YouTube, there's a video. We did it, Katie McCauley, our program and operations manager, did it for us in 2018. Nothing has changed about our legislative website since then. It has not been updated in any way. It's still the same website. So that video that will teach you, how do I track a piece of legislation? How do I know when it's going to committee, when it's going to be heard? That video will walk you through, and I have that website on a slide later on, and I'll also drop it in the chat in just a little bit. But it is really important that you contact your legislator when it's timely. So in January and in early February, when you are hearing about all of the bills that have been introduced in our legislature, and you have a very strong opinion about one or more of those bills, I mean, I always have strong opinions about like 20 or 30 or 50, or last year, 67 of those bills. It's not the right time to call your legislator about it. You've got to wait until it's timely for them as well as for you. So I am going to do two things right now. First, on your screen, I don't think I can copy and paste it from here, but on your screen is the website for the General Assembly, capitol.tn.gov, and then the how to track a bill. That's such an awkward address. I'm just going to drop it in the chat so you can copy and paste it, is also there. And I'm going to take just 1 minute to actually show you the legislative website so that you have some familiarity with it. And then we'll go ahead and we will continue this conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And we are going to, there you go. And let me see if I can share the screen. Oh, Rachel, thank you for dropping that in the chat for us. So Rachel dropped in the website. So can everyone see the General Assembly website? Okay, so as I said, it has not been updated in a really long time. So it's not always the most intuitive of the websites that you will encounter, but the things that you will need to, that you're, when it comes to calendars, because I think it's important. On this tab where it says schedules and calendars, right now it's super empty because they're not in session. But if you click on that, you'll be able to click on then any day of the week, and it will list when different committees are meeting. If you're interested in a specific bill, you will want to know the bill number. So I'm going to, well, I'm just going to pick a bill number. And you would just come up into here if you know the bill number, which you can get at the beginning of session. Since we're out of session, it's hard to really talk about it. So I'm just going to pick House Bill 640 from last session. I don't remember what it is, but the number 640 still means, oh, because that's our menstrual hygiene bill from last session. So if you know a bill number, you can enter it into this page and it will tell you, for example, if it's placed on a calendar, and then you can go over, and so it was placed on the Civil Justice Subcommittee calendar. And then you can go and look at the Civil Justice schedule under schedules and calendars and see when it will be heard that day and how it will move. And we'll have sessions where we talk about this during actual legislative sessions, so it's a little easier to track. But getting familiar with this website is kind of the first step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording so that we can answer questions. I see that there are some in the chat, and I'll start with those. But also feel free to interrupt me once this recording